are lots of different propagation steps in chain reactions, not just one. For example, now that we've created this new radical, the methyl radical, that radical could go on to do a propagation step. Let's say that it reacted with another chlorine molecule, Cl2. And again, you're going to have to pay attention on what's happening here. In this step, we're going to break the chlorine-chlorine bond in the same way that we've been breaking all of these bonds, by splitting the electrons apart. They don't stay together. One of the electrons in this chlorine-chlorine bond is going to go to a chlorine atom. We'll choose the one on the right. And that's going to generate a chlorine radical. Go ahead and draw that out. The other electron in the chlorine-chlorine bond is going to come out here and hook up with a single electron on the carbon atom to make a carbon-chlorine bond. So we've got this single electron combining with one of these bonding electrons to make the carbon-chlorine bond. And this shows us how we generate one of the products of the chlorination reaction. And we could have, we'll do just one more example of a propagation step. We could have another chlorine radical, say, interacting with this molecule that we just produced, chloromethane. And let's say in this step we're going to break this carbon-hydrogen bond right here. We'll put one electron on the carbon, another electron comes out to interact with the electron from the chlorine radical. Gives us an HCl molecule, and it gives us another carbon-based radical. And there are, let's add in here, many more propagation steps. You could spend a whole lot of time drawing out all of the propagation steps, all the possible propagation steps for this particular reaction. The third step in a chain reaction is called termination. And in the termination step, two radicals combine together to make a non-radical. So the name makes sense because it's terminating the existence of the radicals, and it does stop the chain reaction. Two radicals combine to form a non-radical. An example of a termination step would be to take the methyl radical that we made in our first propagation step, and let's say instead of the methyl radical reacting with a chlorine molecule like we showed it here in our propagation step, what if it reacted with a chlorine radical? In that case, the single electron from the carbon would combine with the single electron from the chlorine, and they would make a carbon-chlorine bond. And this shows us another way in which the monochlorinated product is formed, different from the one that we saw in the propagation steps that I wrote out. You could also have another example of a termination step, and this one wouldn't be all that common for this particular reaction. Two methyl radicals coming together. And again, we're just going to have the single electron from each radical combining to make a bond. In this case, a carbon-carbon bond and a molecule of ethane. As we get deeper into this chapter, I'll explain to you why this particular termination isn't going to be all that common for the chlorination of methane reaction, but it's certainly a possibility. And again, there will be more. There will be a lot of termination steps, and you could spend a lot of time writing all of the termination steps out for this process, but we're not going to do that. So your study question for this section will just say, what are the 3 steps of a free radical chain reaction? You need to be able to identify them. If I give you a step, to be able to identify whether or not it's a termination or a propagation or an initiation step. And you also need to be able to some extent, write them out. Like, show me an example of an initiation step for the chlorination reaction. Show me an example of a potential termination step for the chlorination of methane. We're not going to stray on tests and quizzes. We're not going to stray outside of this one particular reaction, the chlorination of methane. So I'm not going to throw something crazy at you. But you do need to be able to identify them when you see them and to be able to provide examples of them as well. And then you want to probably take a full 3 minutes to write a summary for this section.